Marcus was just 12 years old when he walked through the gates of his new school for the first time. His small hands clutched the strap of his worn-out backpack and his eyes darted nervously from side to side. Everything around him felt so different. The tall buildings, the colorful playground, the chatter of hundreds of kids rushing past him. He was used to a smaller school back in his old neighborhood, where everyone knew his name, where the teachers smiled warmly, and the streets outside were familiar. Here he felt like a stranger in a world that didn't seem to have a place for him yet. His mother had told him the night before, "Be strong, Marcus. This is a new beginning. People may not know you yet, but you have a good heart, and that's what matters most." Her words echoed in his mind as he walked slowly, wishing he could hold on to her hand a little longer. But she had already left for work, and now Marcus had to face the unknown all by himself. He noticed groups of children laughing together, some sharing jokes, others running to class as if they belonged there since forever. Marcus felt out of place. His uniform was slightly faded because his family couldn't afford a brand new one, and his shoes had scratches from being passed down from his older cousin. He tried to keep his head high, but deep inside, he hoped nobody would notice these small things that made him different. When Marcus entered his classroom, the noise of children chatting filled the air. Some kids glanced at him for a moment and then went back to their conversations. The teacher, Mrs. Williams, gave him a polite smile. "Class, this is Marcus," she announced. "He just transferred here. Let's make him feel welcome." Marcus forced a smile and waved awkwardly, but not a single hand waved back. A few kids whispered to each other and giggled. He walked to his seat at the back of the room, pretending he didn't notice. As the day went on, Marcus tried to focus on his lessons. He loved reading and solving math problems, and back in his old school, teachers often praised him for being one of the brightest students. But here he felt invisible. Whenever he tried to answer questions, some students rolled their eyes. He overheard a boy mutter, "Why does he talk so proper?" Marcus swallowed his words and stayed silent. At lunch, Marcus sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. The smell of food filled the room, but he wasn't hungry. He watched groups of kids sitting together, laughing and sharing snacks. He missed his old friends, the ones who would save him a seat without him even asking. He unwrapped the sandwich his mother had packed, but before he could take a bite, he noticed a group of boys staring at him. They whispered something to each other and laughed. Marcus quickly looked down at his food, pretending not to notice, but his heart pounded. Still, Marcus tried to stay hopeful. He reminded himself of what his mother always said, "Every challenge is a chance to grow stronger." He wanted to believe that this school could be a place where he would eventually belong, where he could make new friends, where he could prove that he wasn't just the new kid. When the final bell rang, Marcus walked out of the school gate slowly, his steps heavy but steady. The day hadn't been easy, but he hadn't given up either. Deep down, there was a quiet strength inside him, something even he didn't fully realize yet. It was the kind of strength that could endure loneliness, mockery, and even cruelty. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, this strength would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. As he walked home that afternoon, the sun casting long shadows on the pavement, Marcus whispered to himself, "Tomorrow will be better." He wanted to believe it. He had to believe it. Because for Marcus, this was more than just a first day at a new school. It was the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but also the lives of everyone who crossed his path. Marcus walked into school the next morning with a nervous smile on his face, trying to convince himself that today would be different. He had carefully ironed his shirt, polished his old shoes as best as he could, and packed his lunch with extra care. "Maybe if I stay confident, things will get better," he whispered quietly to himself, but deep inside, a knot of fear sat heavy in his stomach. The first few hours passed quietly. Marcus kept to himself, answering questions when the teacher called on him, but avoiding drawing too much attention. Then, during recess, everything began to change. Marcus was standing near the basketball court, watching a group of boys play. He loved basketball. Back in his old neighborhood, he often spent hours shooting hoops with his friends. He wanted to join, but he was too shy to ask. "Hey, new kid," a loud voice suddenly shouted. Marcus looked up. A tall boy with messy blonde hair and a crooked grin was staring at him. His name was Jason, one of the most popular boys in school, and also the kind of kid who enjoyed being the center of attention. Around him stood 3 other boys, all snickering. "Where are you from, huh?" Jason asked, stepping closer. You don't look like you belong here. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know what to say. His heart raced and his palms grew sweaty. I just moved here, he answered softly. Jason smirked. Yeah, I figured. Those shoes look like they came from the trash. His friends burst out laughing. Marcus felt his face grow hot, but he stayed quiet, hoping it would end quickly. Another boy, a chubby kid named Ryan, leaned forward and poked Marcus's lunch bag. What do you even eat? Bet it's something weird. He pulled out Marcus's sandwich and waved it around. Look, guys, it's just peanut butter and jelly. Even my little sister eats better than this. More laughter followed. Marcus wanted to snatch back his food, but he froze. He remembered his mom waking up early, spreading peanut butter on that bread with so much love and wrapping it carefully for him. Now it was being tossed around like garbage. He clenched his fists tightly, but he kept his head down. Then Jason stepped even closer and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Why's your skin so dark, huh? Did you get burned or something? His friends roared with laughter again, but Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just about shoes or sandwiches anymore. This was about who he was. For a moment, Marcus wanted to scream, to shout that there was nothing wrong with him, that his skin was beautiful, that he was proud of who he was, but the words stayed trapped inside. Instead, he turned away, trying to walk back toward the classroom. Hey, don't walk away from me, Jason called, running ahead and blocking his path. We're just having fun, aren't we, boys? The other kids nodded, still laughing. A small crowd had begun to gather, watching the scene unfold. Some students giggled nervously, while others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Marcus lowered his gaze and whispered, Please, just leave me alone. Jason leaned in and said, What's the matter, tough guy, afraid? Then he gave Marcus a little shove, just enough to make him stumble back. The crowd laughed louder. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to disappear. But just then the bell rang and the teacher's voice called the students back inside. Jason smirked, slapped Marcus's lunch bag onto the ground and walked away with his gang, laughing loudly as if they had just won a game. Marcus bent down, picked up his bag, and brushed off the dirt. His sandwich was squashed, but he carefully placed it back inside. He didn't cry. He refused to cry. He told himself, crying will only make them stronger. As he walked back to class, some kids whispered behind his back. Others avoided his eyes, but Marcus kept his head straight even though his chest ached with hurt. This was only the beginning of what he would endure. But in his silence, there was a quiet strength growing, a strength the bullies had not yet seen. That night, when Marcus got home, his mother noticed how quiet he was. How was school today, baby? She asked gently, placing dinner on the table. Marcus hesitated, then forced a smile. It was fine, he said, even though it wasn't. He didn't want her to worry. Later, lying in bed, Marcus stared at the ceiling and thought about Jason's words. They replayed in his head like a cruel echo. He clenched his fists under the blanket and whispered, I'll show them one day. They'll see who I really am. And though Marcus didn't realize it yet, this very first encounter with the bullies was the spark that would lead to a story none of them would ever forget. The cafeteria buzzed with noise the next afternoon. Trays clattered, kids laughed, and the smell of pizza and fries filled the air. Marcus carried his lunch quietly, his shoulders slightly hunched, hoping to find a corner where nobody would bother him. His mother had packed him another peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, and a small juice box. It wasn't fancy, but to Marcus it was love wrapped inside a paper bag. He scanned the room. Tables were already packed with groups of friends laughing and chatting. Marcus spotted an empty seat at the far end near the windows. He walked quickly, his eyes down, trying not to attract attention. But Jason, the tall boy who had mocked him before, saw him immediately. Jason's grin widened. Hey, look, it's the new kid again, he shouted across the room. Heads turned and suddenly all eyes were on Marcus. He froze for a moment, then forced himself to keep walking. Where you going, new boy? Jason teased loudly. Don't you want to sit with us? His friends Ryan, Mark, and Evan laughed, banging the table to get attention. A wave of giggles spread through the cafeteria. Marcus sat down quickly at the far end, opening his bag and pretending not to hear them. He tried to keep his focus on the sandwich in front of him, but his hands trembled slightly. He thought if he ignored them, maybe they would stop. But Jason wasn't the kind of boy who stopped when someone stayed quiet. The bullies stood up and walked toward Marcus, the sound of their footsteps making his stomach tighten. Jason leaned over Marcus's table, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What do we have here?" he said, snatching Marcus's sandwich. He unwrapped it dramatically and held it up. "Oh, look, peanut butter and jelly again. The gourmet meal of the century." The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Some kids covered their mouths, others laughed loudly, and a few just watched with pity in their eyes. Marcus felt his face burn, but he kept his mouth shut. "Want some, guys?" Jason asked, pretending to offer the sandwich to his friends. Then with a sudden motion, he smashed it onto the table, squashing it flat. "Oops, guess it slipped." Ryan grabbed Marcus's juice box and squeezed it so the liquid spilled onto the table, dripping onto Marcus's lap. "Man, look at him. He's all wet now." Ryan laughed. Marcus quickly stood up, trying to brush the juice off his pants, but the humiliation only grew worse. Jason smirked and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Careful, Marcus. Don't melt. Your skin's already dark enough." The room roared with laughter again. Marcus's chest tightened as if the air had been punched out of him. He wanted to scream, to shout that this wasn't fair, but his voice wouldn't come out. He stood frozen, surrounded by laughter, his eyes burning but no tears falling. Some kids shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A girl at a nearby table whispered, "That's so mean," but she didn't dare speak louder. Others simply enjoyed the spectacle, happy that they weren't the ones being targeted. Jason then picked up the squashed sandwich and tossed it into the trash. "There, problem solved. No more garbage food at our school." His friends cheered like he had just won a prize. Marcus sat back down slowly, trying to hold on to his pride, even though his lunch was gone and his clothes were stained. He kept his head high, though inside his heart was breaking. He thought about his mother waking up early to prepare that food, not knowing it would end up in the trash because of some cruel joke. The bell finally rang, ending lunch. Students gathered their trays and hurried to class, still laughing and whispering about what they had just seen. Jason and his gang strutted away, satisfied with their performance. Marcus stayed behind for a moment, alone in the now empty cafeteria. He looked at the table where his lunch had been destroyed and whispered softly, "Why me?" His voice trembled, but no one was there to hear it. That afternoon he sat through class silently, his eyes fixed on the blackboard but his mind far away. He wasn't thinking about math problems or history lessons. He was thinking about how unfair life felt, how lonely it was to stand against laughter and cruelty. When school ended, Marcus walked home slowly, dragging his feet. He didn't want his mother to see his stained clothes, so he stopped by the park fountain and tried to clean them with water. He didn't want her to know what had happened. He didn't want her to worry. That night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. His chest hurt from holding everything inside. He clenched his fists under the blanket and whispered, "I won't let them break me. I won't." What Marcus didn't realize was that his quiet strength, his refusal to cry in front of them, was the very thing that made him different. The humiliation was painful, but it was shaping him into someone far stronger than the bullies could ever understand. And soon, their laughter would turn into regret, because the truth about Marcus's life was something none of them were ready to face. The next few days at school felt heavy for Marcus. Every time he stepped into the hallway, he could feel eyes following him, whispers buzzing behind his back, and the sound of laughter that wasn't meant for him but still cut through his heart like glass. After what happened in the cafeteria, the bullies seemed to grow more confident. They thought Marcus was an easy target, quiet, gentle, and unwilling to fight back. But what none of them realized was that Marcus's silence wasn't weakness. It was strength, though even Marcus himself didn't fully understand it yet. He had grown up in a home where his mother worked long hours, sometimes juggling 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. His father had passed away when Marcus was very young, but Marcus remembered his father's words. "A man's dignity is his shield. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." Those words lived inside him, shaping how he faced the world. So when Jason and his gang laughed, when Ryan mocked his clothes, when kids pointed at him in the hallway, Marcus chose not to react. He walked calmly to class, sat in his seat and focused on his lessons. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Of course, inside it hurt. Sometimes during class, Marcus's eyes would blur, and he would blink rapidly, pretending to focus on the chalkboard when really he was holding back tears. Sometimes his chest ached so badly that he wanted to scream. But every morning when he looked in the mirror before school, he whispered to himself, "Stay strong. They don't define you." The teachers noticed his quiet nature but didn't see the battle raging inside him. Mrs. Williams often praised him for his neat handwriting and correct answers. "Good work, Marcus," she would say, smiling. Marcus would nod politely, though he never raised his hand to share more than necessary. He didn't want to draw attention. During recess, while other kids played and laughed, Marcus often sat under the old oak tree at the corner of the playground. He would open a small notebook and write in it. Poems, thoughts, sometimes just single words like hope, strength, future. Writing gave him peace. It reminded him that even if he couldn't speak his truth out loud, he could still give it life on paper. Some kids noticed him sitting alone, scribbling quietly. A few whispered, "He's weird," but Marcus didn't mind. What they didn't know was that his notebook was his shield. It was where he poured all the pain, all the fear, and all the strength he refused to show on his face. At home, Marcus kept everything hidden from his mother. When she asked about school, he smiled and said, "It's fine, Mom." He didn't want her to carry his burden. She already worked too hard, already sacrificed too much. Instead, he helped her wash dishes, did his homework quietly, and hugged her tighter than usual, as if drawing strength from her presence. One night, while he was writing in his notebook, Marcus thought about the bullies again. Their laughter replayed in his head like an echo he couldn't escape. For a moment, anger flared in him. He wanted to fight back, to yell at them, to show them he wasn't weak. But then his father's words returned. "A man's dignity is his shield." Fighting back in anger would only strip him of that dignity. So Marcus made a silent promise to himself. "I'll endure this. I'll rise above it. And one day they'll see me for who I truly am." At school, his calmness began to confuse some kids. They expected him to lash out, to crumble, to beg the bullies to stop. But Marcus didn't. He carried himself with quiet dignity, walking with his head high even when laughter followed him down the hallway. Some students started to whisper, not insults, but curiosity. Why doesn't he ever fight back? He's so calm. A few even began to respect him in secret, though they didn't dare say it out loud. Jason and his gang, however, saw Marcus's silence as weakness. "He's scared of us," Jason bragged to his friends. "That's why he doesn't talk back." They had no idea that what they saw as fear was actually unshakable strength, the kind that doesn't need fists or loud words. Marcus kept walking, kept writing, kept smiling politely when teachers praised him. On the outside, he was just another quiet boy trying to get through school. But inside, he was building something powerful, resilience. He didn't know it yet, but that resilience would soon become his greatest weapon, the very thing that would turn humiliation into respect, and cruelty into regret. For now, though, Marcus remained silent but never broken, silent but stronger than any of them could imagine. The weeks passed slowly for Marcus, each day feeling like a test of his patience and strength. He had grown used to walking through the hallways with whispers following him, to sitting alone during lunch and to pretending he didn't hear the cruel jokes the bullies threw his way. His silence had become his armor, but deep inside he longed for a chance, just one chance, to show them he was more than the boy they mocked. That chance came on an ordinary afternoon during gym class. The students gathered on the school field, the sun shining down on the grass as the coach announced the day's activity, relay races. Excitement buzzed in the air. Teams were quickly divided, and Marcus, as usual, ended up last to be picked. Jason and his gang made sure of it. "Fine, you can take him," Jason said mockingly when the teacher forced him to include Marcus in his group. "But don't blame me if we lose." His friends laughed, already certain Marcus would slow them down. Marcus said nothing, as always. He simply lined up with the others, adjusting the laces on his old sneakers. He had no idea this would be the moment that changed everything. When the race began, Marcus watched the runners ahead of him sprint across the field, their sneakers kicking up dirt. His team was already falling behind, and Jason shouted angrily, "Hurry up, you idiots!" Marcus waited patiently for his turn, his heart pounding harder with every second. Finally, the baton was passed to him. The instant it touched his hand, something inside Marcus lit up. His legs exploded into motion faster than anyone expected. The air rushed past his ears and the ground blurred beneath his feet. The kids on the sidelines gasped. Marcus wasn't just running, he was flying. His strides were long, powerful, and smooth, as if he had been born to race. He overtook one runner, then another, and then another. By the time he reached the finish line, he had not only caught up but pulled his team into the lead. Silence fell for a moment as everyone processed what they had just seen. Then came the shouts. "Whoa! Did you see that? He's so fast." Students clapped and cheered, even those who had once laughed at him. Jason stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't expected this. The boy he had mocked for weeks had just saved his team from embarrassment. Marcus handed over the baton calmly, breathing heavily but keeping his face steady. Inside, his heart raced, not just from the sprint but from the realization that for the first time they had seen him differently. The coach blew his whistle and shouted, "Incredible! Marcus, that was amazing speed. Where did you learn to run like that?" Marcus shrugged quietly. "Just practice," he said. In truth, he had always loved running. Back in his old neighborhood, racing through the streets with friends was his favorite pastime. It made him feel free, untouchable, as if the world couldn't catch him. After the relay ended, whispers spread quickly across the field. "That new kid is so fast. Did you see him pass everyone like that?" Even kids who had ignored him before now looked at him with wide eyes full of surprise. But not everyone was impressed. Jason forced a laugh and said loudly, "So what? It's just running. Doesn't mean anything." His friends nodded, but there was a flicker of unease in their eyes. Deep down, they knew what they had just witnessed wasn't ordinary. For Marcus, this race was more than just a victory. It was proof to himself and to everyone that he was not weak, not worthless, not someone to be humiliated. He had talent, he had strength, and he had a spark inside him that no amount of bullying could erase. That night, when Marcus got home, he sat at the kitchen table with his mother, eating dinner quietly. She noticed a faint smile on his face, the first real smile she had seen in weeks. "What happened today?" she asked curiously. Marcus looked up, his eyes shining. "I ran," he said simply. She raised her eyebrows. "You ran?" He nodded. "And I was faster than everyone." His mother's face softened into a proud smile. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I told you, Marcus. You have something special inside you. Never forget that." That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he replayed the race over and over in his mind. The wind in his face, the cheers from the sidelines, the look of shock on Jason's face. For the first time since coming to the new school, he felt a spark of hope. The bullies had laughed, humiliated, and mocked him. But now they had seen a glimpse of his strength. And though they would not admit it, the balance had begun to shift. This was the turning point. From this moment on, things would never be the same. The next few days after the race were different. For the first time, Marcus wasn't just the quiet new kid. Students whispered about him in the hallways, but this time the words were not cruel. They talked about his speed, his calmness, the way he had outrun everyone on the field as if it were nothing. Some kids even smiled at him when he walked past, though Marcus still kept his head low, unsure if he could trust their sudden change. Jason and his gang, however, were furious. They couldn't stand the thought of Marcus being admired, even a little. To them, it felt like he was stealing their spotlight. Jason especially hated the memory of Marcus sprinting past his team like lightning. "We can't let him think he's better than us," Jason growled one afternoon. "We need to remind him who runs this school." His friends agreed, smirking as they began plotting something crueler, something more humiliating than before. The opportunity came during history class. Mrs. Williams had given the students a project. Write about someone in your family who inspires you the most. Each student was to share their story in front of the class. When it was Marcus's turn, he walked slowly to the front with his small notebook in his hands. His palms were sweaty, but his eyes were steady. He began reading in his calm, clear voice. "My father," he said softly, "was the person who inspires me the most. He was a soldier. He fought in the army to protect people, even people he didn't know. He was brave, strong, and kind. But one day, when I was very little, he didn't come home. He died while saving others. The classroom went quiet. Not a single whisper, not a giggle, not even the sound of shuffling feet. Marcus's words hung heavy in the air, carrying a weight none of them had expected. "He was a hero," Marcus continued. His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. Even though I lost him, I remember what he always told me. A man's dignity is his shield. Never let anyone take that away from you. Those words are the reason I try to stay strong, no matter what happens. My father's courage lives inside me, and I want to make him proud. When Marcus finished, he closed his notebook quietly and looked at the floor, expecting nothing, maybe even laughter from the bullies. But the room remained silent. Some students had tears in their eyes. Even Mrs. Williams's voice cracked when she said, "Thank you, Marcus. That was beautiful." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected this. His smirk faded, replaced by something unfamiliar. Shame. After class, the whispers began again, but they were different this time. "Did you know his dad was a soldier? He died a hero. That's why he's so strong." The truth spread quickly around the school. Everyone learned about Marcus's father, about the sacrifice he had made, about the quiet boy who carried the weight of a hero's legacy. The bullies, once so loud, found themselves strangely silent. Jason tried to laugh it off at first. So what? His dad was in the army. Big deal. But the words didn't carry the same power anymore. His friends didn't laugh as easily. Deep down, even they knew the truth was bigger than their cruelty. The next day at lunch, Marcus sat at his usual table, alone. But this time, something unexpected happened. A boy from his class walked over and placed an extra apple in front of him. "Hey, that was a really brave story," the boy said quietly. "Your dad sounds amazing." Marcus looked up surprised. He nodded shyly. "Thanks." One by one, other students began to see Marcus differently. He wasn't just the black kid or the new kid anymore. He was the son of a hero, a boy who carried strength in silence, a boy who refused to break even under cruelty. Jason watched all of this from across the cafeteria, his fists clenching under the table. He realized that no matter how many times he tried to humiliate Marcus, he could never take away the one thing Marcus had that he didn't: dignity. The truth was terrifying to the bullies, not because of Marcus's father alone, but because Marcus himself embodied that same courage. They couldn't control him, couldn't defeat him because he wasn't playing their game. His silence, his strength, his story. It was bigger than their laughter. That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the notebook on his nightstand. For the first time, he felt lighter. The truth about his father was no longer a secret he carried alone. People knew now, and instead of mocking him, they respected him. He whispered softly into the darkness, "I hope I made you proud, Dad." And deep inside, he knew he had. The gymnasium was unusually quiet that morning, but Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy thinking about the project his teacher had assigned, the one that asked every student to share the story of someone in their family who inspired them. To most kids, it was a simple assignment. They could write about their mom, their dad, or even a grandparent. But for Marcus, it was different. This project was about more than just writing. It was about opening a wound he rarely showed anyone. When Mrs. Williams called his name, Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he carried his little notebook to the front of the class. He felt every eye on him, the silence thick with curiosity. Jason leaned back in his chair with a smirk, whispering something to Ryan. The bullies were already preparing to laugh. Marcus stood there, his notebook pressed tightly to his chest. For a moment, he thought about sitting back down, about keeping his story hidden, but then he remembered his father's words. "A man's dignity is his shield. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened the notebook and began to read. "My father," he said softly, his voice carrying through the room, "is the person who inspires me most. He was a soldier in the army. He was brave. He fought not just for himself, but for people he had never even met. He wanted the world to be safer for everyone." The room grew still. Even the usual whispers faded. Marcus's eyes lowered to the page, but his voice grew stronger. "When I was little, he left for a mission. He told me he would come back, but he never did. He gave his life to save others. People called him a hero, but to me, he was just my dad. The man who carried me on his shoulders. The man who told me bedtime stories. The man who always reminded me, your dignity is your shield." For a long moment, no one breathed. The words landed heavy, pressing into the hearts of everyone listening. Some kids shifted in their seats, their eyes softening with guilt. Even Mrs. Williams swallowed hard. her hand pressed against her chest. Marcus turned the page and finished quietly. I don't have him anymore, but his words stay with me. They help me when people are unkind. They remind me that strength doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it means standing tall when the world tries to push you down. He closed the notebook and lowered his gaze, expecting laughter, a cruel remark, anything to shatter the moment. But instead silence. Not mocking silence, but the kind that carried respect, the kind that meant every word had sunk deep. For the first time, Jason wasn't grinning. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with a look Marcus had never seen on him before, unease. Ryan shifted awkwardly in his chair, avoiding Marcus's eyes. The truth had hit them harder than any punch could. Mrs. Williams broke the silence. Thank you, Marcus, she said softly, her voice heavy with emotion. That was one of the bravest things I've ever heard from a student. Marcus nodded, returned to his seat, and sat quietly, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew something had changed. By the end of the day, the story had spread through the school. Everyone knew about Marcus's father, about his sacrifice, about the legacy of bravery Marcus carried. The boy they once mocked for his skin, his clothes, and his silence was suddenly someone different, someone they couldn't laugh at anymore. At lunch, Marcus still sat alone at first. But then a small gesture changed everything. A girl from his class walked up, placed her unopened juice box in front of him, and said softly, "Your dad was a hero. You should be proud." She gave him a shy smile before walking away. Others began to glance his way, not with cruelty but with curiosity, even admiration. A few whispered things like, "Did you hear what he said? I didn't know his dad was a soldier. No wonder he's so strong." Jason and his gang sat at their usual table, but the mood was different. Jason tried to joke about it. So what, his dad was in the army? Doesn't mean he's special. But his voice lacked its usual confidence, and his friends didn't laugh as loudly. In their silence, Jason felt the truth pressing down on him, the kind of truth he couldn't bully away. That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. For once, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. Instead, he felt light, almost free. He had spoken his truth, and instead of breaking him, it had lifted him. He whispered into the darkness, his voice soft but steady. "I hope I made you proud, Dad." And deep inside, he knew he had. The terrifying truth wasn't just that Marcus's father had been a hero. It was that Marcus himself carried that same quiet strength. And now everyone finally knew it. The days after Marcus shared his father's story felt different. Something in the air around the school had changed. The laughter that usually followed Marcus down the hallway was quieter now, replaced with whispers. Not mocking whispers, but ones filled with curiosity, respect, and sometimes guilt. Students who once turned their backs now looked at him with new eyes, as if they were seeing him for the first time. But for Jason and his gang, the change wasn't so easy to swallow. They sat together at lunch, their trays untouched, their voices lower than usual. Normally, Jason would be cracking jokes, making fun of someone, and leading the room with loud confidence. Now he stared at his food, his fork dragging lines through mashed potatoes. Ryan finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Did you hear what people are saying?" "They're calling his dad a hero," Jason scowled. "So what? That doesn't mean he's anything special." But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. Deep down, Jason couldn't erase the image of Marcus standing at the front of the classroom, reading about his father with such calm dignity. It haunted him. Evan, another boy from their group, shifted uncomfortably. "It's kinda messed up, man, the stuff we said to him." "Yeah," Ryan added, quieter now. "Like when I dumped juice on him, or when you smashed his food, and all that stuff about his skin." His words trailed off, the weight of guilt pressing on him. Jason snapped, "He didn't even fight back. He just stood there like nothing happened. He could have told a teacher, but he didn't." "Why do you think he didn't?" The table fell silent. None of them had an answer. The truth was too obvious. Marcus wasn't weak. He was stronger than all of them, because he had carried their cruelty without breaking. Later that afternoon, during gym class, Jason watched Marcus from across the field. Marcus was sitting under the oak tree, his notebook balanced on his lap, writing as usual. Jason felt a strange heaviness in his chest, something he wasn't used to, shame. He remembered every insult, every shove, every laugh at Marcus's expense, and suddenly those memories didn't feel funny anymore. They felt ugly. That night, Jason tossed and turned in bed. He remembered Marcus's words about his father, the way he had said, "Strength doesn't always mean fighting back." Jason thought about his own father, alive, healthy and sitting on the couch every evening watching TV. Jason had taken that for granted. Marcus had lost his dad, yet he carried himself with more dignity than anyone Jason knew. For the first time in his life, Jason didn't feel powerful. He felt small. The next morning, as Marcus walked into school carrying his faded backpack, Jason's group stood near the lockers. Ryan nudged Jason and whispered, "Maybe we should, say something." Jason hesitated. Apologies weren't something he was used to. He was the leader, the loud one, the one everyone feared. Saying sorry would make him look weak. At least that's what he had always believed. But when Marcus passed by, his eyes calm and steady as always, Jason felt that heaviness again. It wasn't Marcus who looked weak. It was him. At lunch that day, Marcus sat alone as usual, unwrapping his simple sandwich. Jason's gang sat a few tables away, their food untouched. Ryan finally stood up and muttered, "I can't take this, man," before walking over to Marcus. He placed a carton of milk on Marcus's tray. "Here," he said awkwardly. "Sorry about, everything." Marcus looked up surprised, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't say anything, just nodded politely. Jason watched the scene unfold, his stomach twisting. For the first time, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't in control anymore. Marcus was. Not because Marcus had fought back with fists, but because Marcus had never needed to. His dignity, his silence, his truth. That was more powerful than anything Jason had. By the end of the week, Jason couldn't take it anymore. He found Marcus at the oak tree after school, writing in his notebook. For a moment, Jason just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to find the right words. Marcus finally looked up. His calm brown eyes met Jason's nervous ones. Jason swallowed hard. "Look, I was a jerk. More than a jerk. I said things I shouldn't have. Did things I shouldn't have, and He paused, the words stuck in his throat. "I'm sorry." The silence stretched between them. Marcus studied him quietly, then closed his notebook. "You can't take back what you said," Marcus replied softly. "But maybe you can change what you do from now on." Jason blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not angry, not fearful, but simply honest. For a long moment, he didn't know what to say. Finally, he nodded slowly. From that day on, Jason and his friends were different. They weren't perfect. Old habits die hard. But the cruel laughter that once filled the halls began to fade. The bullies avoided humiliating Marcus, and slowly, they even began to respect him. The realization had hit them harder than they expected. The boy they thought was powerless had carried more strength than all of them combined. And that strength had forced them to see the truth about themselves. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. The school that once felt like a battlefield of whispers and laughter was slowly changing. The cruel words that used to echo in the hallways were replaced with something new. Silence at first, then small signs of respect. It started with little gestures. A classmate would save him a seat in the cafeteria. Another would share homework notes. Sometimes kids who had laughed at him before now stopped to ask about his day. These were small things, but to Marcus they meant the world. One afternoon during gym, the coach called for another relay race. This time, when teams were being chosen, Marcus wasn't left for last. In fact, students whispered to each other, "Pick Marcus, he's fast. We need him." Hearing those words made Marcus's chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something warmer. Acceptance. Jason, too, was changing. The boy who once mocked Marcus now found himself quieter, less eager to bully others. The weight of shame still followed him, but Marcus's words, "You can't take back what you said, but you can change what you do from now on," played in his head every day. It wasn't easy for Jason, but slowly he tried. He stopped laughing when other kids were picked on. He didn't shove Marcus in the hallway anymore. He even caught himself standing up for smaller kids, surprising everyone, even himself. The biggest shift came during a school assembly. The principal announced an essay contest with the theme, "Who inspires you most?" Students would read their essays aloud in front of the entire school. Marcus didn't plan to enter. He didn't like the spotlight. But Mrs. Williams encouraged him. "Your story matters, Marcus," she said gently. "Sometimes the world needs to hear voices like yours." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. On the day of the assembly, he stood on stage, facing hundreds of students and teachers. His notebook trembled slightly in his hands, but his voice was steady as he read. He spoke about his father again, about bravery, sacrifice, and dignity. He spoke about pain, about being different, about being humiliated. And he spoke about strength, not the kind that comes from fists or shouting, but the kind that comes from patience, resilience, and believing in yourself even when no one else does. As he finished, the auditorium was silent. For a moment, Marcus feared the worst. But then it happened, applause. It started with one clap, then another, until the entire room was on its feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus looked out over the crowd, stunned. For the first time since he had walked through the school gates, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel small. He felt seen. Even Jason stood and clapped, his face serious but full of something that looked almost like admiration. In that moment, Marcus realized something important. Respect wasn't about being feared. It wasn't about being popular. True respect came from living with dignity, no matter the cost. After the assembly, students crowded around him. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others told him, "You're amazing, Marcus. You inspire me." He felt overwhelmed, but in a good way. This was the respect he had never asked for, but had quietly earned through his strength. When he got home that evening, his mother noticed the light in his eyes. "Something happened today," she said, smiling knowingly. Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he whispered. "People see me differently now." She hugged him tightly. "They see what I've always seen. A strong, brave boy who carries his father's spirit inside him." Marcus hugged her back, his eyes closing as he thought of his father. For the first time in a long time, the memory of his father didn't bring only sadness. It brought pride. From that day forward, Marcus wasn't just the boy who had been bullied. He was the boy who endured, who inspired, who reminded everyone that dignity and kindness were more powerful than cruelty. The bullies who once mocked him learned a lesson they would never forget. The students who once laughed at him now looked up to him. And Marcus, the quiet boy with a faded backpack and a simple notebook, became a symbol of strength. Respect had been reborn not because Marcus demanded it, but because he had lived in a way that made it impossible to deny.